to YouTube.
Okay. And Mary Beth, just for clarity, should I get ahead of myself or skip something? Will it be you or Carol that will be helping me out with that? Because as you know, Linda's not here today.
Yes. And Carol and I are both here to help you along the way, just depending on where you need that guidance. We'll jump in and rescue you.
Okay, excellent.
Jan, you have a question? You can unmute.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm part of the, I think I should be a participant, but in the video, I'm not on the video.
Oh yeah, there you are. Okay. Let me pull you in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, it is 6:01, so at this time I'd like to bring this meeting to order. This is the Public Health and Safety combined with the Noise Committee meeting for the town of Loomis. And pursuant to Executive Order N2920, certain provisions of the Open Meeting Act are suspended due to a state of emergency in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Consistent with the executive order, the 2020 General Plan Update Housing Committee meeting will be held via Zoom format. And we are also available, we're also able to access Zoom through telephone. And for those participants who wish to speak at the time of either committee comment or public comment, whichever is appropriate, the way to do so, if you're on your PC or Mac, is to use the raise your hand function for Zoom, or if you're on a telephone, then you use the *9, and then Mary Beth will see that your hand is raised, and then we'll call on you at that time to speak and remind you to unmute. So with that, let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. And if anyone has a better flag than I do, if you see my flag right there, if you have a better flag, we can look at that one, but that's going to be the default, if nothing else. I see no volunteers. Okay, so if we will all stand and salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States
of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation, under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Mary Beth, would you conduct roll call, please?
Mary, do you want me to do this as two separate roll call centers, or am I just doing one big roll call?
One big roll call, and where the names overlap, you only need to call them once.
Okay, I'll try to remember that. Okay. Chairman Danny Cartwright.
Here.
Russ Kelly.
Here.
John Ireland.
Here.
Martha Merriam. I saw Martha, didn't I? Oh, there she is.
Didn't unmute. I'm here.
Okay. AJ Moyer. I don't see AJ. Auxiliary member Carolyn McCullough.
Here.
Georgia Ann Kern. I just her there, but she's muted. Paul Ballard.
Here.
Eva Marshall. Melissa Netzel.
Here.
David Ring. And Jan Clark Kretz.
Here.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Roger Smith.
Oh, I missed Roger. How did I miss Roger?
Hey,
But I don't see him here.
I don't either.
Okay.
Okay. With that, I'd like to open it for committee comment for items not on the agenda tonight.
So at this time, any committee member comment for items not on the agenda. Now is your chance to speak. You would raise your hand and we'll let you speak. Seeing none, sir.
Okay. With that, then we'd like to open up the public comment for any item not on the agenda.
We have one public comment. Dottie, go ahead and unmute and talk.
Thank you so much. And first, I want to say thank you for having these meetings. They're very informative. From a noise perspective, I happen to live at the corner of Hunter Oaks and Brace. And we have a lot of traffic going by and things are changing in the area. So I'm not sure if this is on the agenda, but what is the committee's stand on block walls, sound reducing block walls? Thank you.
Thank you, Dottie. To address that comment, I think we will add that to our comments list for this committee for future discussion, and we'll get you a reply, Dottie.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Any other public members that wish to speak at this time? Seeing none, Chairman.
Okay. So at this time, we're going to move on to the adoption of the agenda. So Mary Beth, at this time, do we need a motion to do this?
A motion and a second, and then Carol will do a roll call vote.
Okay. May I have a motion to the adopt the agenda as it stands?
I so moved.
Who was that?
Melissa.
Melissa. Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you, Melissa.
Is there a second? Excellent.
That was John Ireland.
Thank you, John. Okay, but we go through a roll call vote. Danny Cartwright,
Aye.
Russ Kelly,
Aye.
John Ireland,
Aye.
Martha Merriam,
Aye.
let's go down here to Paul Ballard.
Aye.
Eva Marshall. Melissa
He was
Netzel.
muted but said aye.
Okay.
Okay.
Melissa Netzel.
Aye.
And that's everybody.
Russ Kelly?
What? I got Russ.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Wait, so 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't have a quorum for the second committee. Is that a problem?
One,
Maybe
Danny?
because I believe that we have an item on the agenda tonight that deals with noise.
And yes, that would be an issue.
Okay.
Let's double check to make sure who we have from which committee.
So from the noise committee, we've got Danny
Mhm.
and Paul, Eva, and Melissa.
That's less than half.
Right.
Yep, then we're missing one, so we can't do any noise items.
well, and look at public health and safety.
Public health and safety, we've got Danny, Russ, John, Martha,
Well,
Danny, Russ, John, Martha. We don't have a quorum for either committee.
For either
No.
committee.
now, just correct me if I'm wrong. Is a quorum at half, including auxiliary or not including auxiliary?
Not
Auxiliary.
including auxiliary.
Then it appears we do have a quorum if you think about it, because so we're not gonna, let's say with the public health and safety. So we're not counting Carolyn or Georgia Ann because they're auxiliary members. So we're missing AJ, Vice Chair Linda Kelly, and Mark Greer, correct?
Correct.
But we have, so that's 3, yet we have 4 members present, and me, Russ Kelly, John Ireland, and Martha Merriam.
So 4 out of 7 committee
4 out of
members.
7 would be good. So we have 4 from each.
We have
Yes,
one,
we have.
4 from each. Yes.
Yeah,
Okay, then we're
Not
good.
Okay.
we're good.
Okay.
Excellent.
Okay.
Let us proceed. So with that, let's jump to committee matters.
We're going to go through the consent agenda first. They're going to go for public comment on any, it's missing from that line. You need to ask for public comment on the consent agenda. And then we'll take a motion to approve the consent agenda and take a roll call for that.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. So at this time, we will open up for public comment for the consent agenda.
Any members of the public wish to comment on the minutes? Seeing none,
Okay. Now, at this point,
You'll ask for a motion.
for the consent agenda.
Right.
Okay, so may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as stands?
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you, guys. And then let's go back through this. Danny Cartwright,
Aye.
Russ Kelly,
Aye.
John Ireland,
Aye.
Martha Merriam, okay.
oh,
Danny,
she's here, but she was muted.
she was muted, okay.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Paul Bullard,
He said aye.
Aye, sorry.
Eva Marshall. Aye, okay. Melissa Netzel,
Aye.
okay, that's everyone.
Okay. So with that, now we're going to move on to the committee matters. And first, we'll recap the March 17th meetings. Yeah, the recap of the March 17th meeting.
Correct. At this point, we don't need introductions. We all know who we are. Matthew Gherkin and where did he go? Luke Saxelby are here to do the PowerPoint presentation for both committees. We've combined these under public health and safety and noise. So everybody gets the same presentation and the same information from these two gentlemen. So Matthew, I think you take it away from here.
Thank you, Mary Beth. Can you see a presentation?
Yes. Any chance of getting it bigger? We've got the sidebar slides and then the,
Yeah, we see your notes area right now and everything versus presentation mode.
yeah, that's the word.
Suzanne, what do I need to do?
I think you can say play from beginning up in your top left, because right now we're looking at your notes and everything. Yeah. Yeah, resume slideshow. Mm-hmm.
What about?
There you go.
There we go.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of this illustrious committee. I will have a short presentation that recaps the previous meeting and brings us into the stage of this general plan update where we're talking about changes to goals, objectives, policies, and implementation measures. Yeah, are you seeing a slide that says recap of March meeting now? Okay, excellent. The last time we met, we talked about the purpose of this element. We talked about highlights of the settings sections that have been prepared to establish existing conditions and important trends. We took some questions. We talked about state law changes that will be important for changes to goals and policies with this general plan update, and started to review comments based on the existing presentation. Assigned homework. I love that part of my role, assigning homework. That's one of those things that I never got to do, but I was always on the receiving end of. So that part's fun. And now we're looking at changes to goals and policies, the general plan itself, based on that review. So a few highlights of what we've heard in the inbox of comments on the setting that also relate to changes to general plan content. There have been comments coming in suggesting that we do need to have policies addressing climate change that relate to reliable power, the placement of critical facilities relative to areas that are affected by future climate change, questions about fire hazard mapping, the fire hazard risk mapping that was presented in the setting section. Questions about addressing vector control district and what they do. Questions about serpentinite soils, asbestos containing rocks and their disturbance. Questions about what the county requires for a defensible space, suggestions for the need for secondary access in the case of emergencies, wildfires, etc. Suggestions that looking forward with, since this area will be affected by more extreme heat events, the need for cooling centers and emergency shelters in collaboration with other public agencies in the area. A note that we should be establishing that wildfire risk is not so much a season any longer as it is nearly year round. And we've observed this in 2018, 2019 in Northern California. Request for more details on what uses have with respect to hazardous materials, use, transport, content. And of 50 or so comments and questions related to noise and other topics. We're compiling a database of every single comment and question that is rolling in through the GPU update email address, and this will all be factored into the general plan update process, generally speaking. We also had some questions that had to do with noise terminology, all the different technical ways of characterizing existing and future noise. This will be updated as a part of the background setting as well as the general plan itself. A question about why the town's exterior noise standard is 65, not 60, as recommended by the state of California general plan guidelines. And questions about whether we are appropriately addressing locally unique local sources of noise like dirt bikes and garage machinery, etc. So that's the kind of recap of where we have been and what we have been hearing vis-a-vis the general plan email inbox. Now, for the fun part, we start to talk about how the general plan should be adjusted to account for important trends, existing conditions, etc. We're looking at, starting tonight, we're going to start to look at existing policies and consider which ones we should just keep as they are written, those that need to be modified to address changes in state law or to address internal consistency among the general plan elements, or to better account for important trends that are affecting the town of Loomis. We're also looking for suggestions on which policies might need to be deleted because they're no longer relevant, and any other rationale for changing goals, objectives, policies, and implementation measures. We are also going to reorganize all the general plan elements so that there's more of a linear relationship between a goal, which is a desired future state, its policy, which is a statement of preference by the town for one outcome or another, objectives, which are measurable outcomes that allow the town to track progress toward goals, and then implementation measures, which is like a to-do list for town staff. So there'll be a reorganization as well as a part of this exercise. I'm hoping you see a slide now that says review of the existing general plan. Yes, excellent. So, these are some of the questions we are asking ourselves internally, and which you can use to support your input via the general plan update email address. Are the existing policies effective? Is the language clear? Should they be strengthened to address something that has become more important since the last general plan? Are there issues that are just missing that we need to address now, such as climate change, resiliency, and adaptation? As I mentioned earlier, is the content no longer relevant? And then finally, state law has changed, especially as it relates to the safety element, and there'll be changes necessary because of state law. The next few slides roll through the existing public health and safety element, what's there now. And then I'm gonna ask a few probing questions that relate to potential changes to that material. I'm trying to move, dealing with a little bit of technical glitchiness here. I can't really see. Well, I'm just going to keep asking you if you see what I think you are saying. So existing safety goals, right?
Yes.
I'm looking at you, Suzanne. You're nodding yes. Okay, excellent. Thank you. So existing safety goals on the books relate to reducing risks, but both natural and man-made hazards through compliance with state and federal safety programs, reducing risk related to wildfire, reducing risk related to flooding, and to seismic activity. So those goals are fairly comprehensive, except that state law now requires that safety elements do address climate change, a changed climate, the effects of a changed climate, and then adaptation and resiliency strategies so that as the climate changes, Loomis can be more resilient toward that change in climate. So that's one gap. Another potential gap that we should address is to incorporate the local hazard mitigation plan by reference, and that local hazard mitigation plan that is a partnership between Loomis, Placer County, and other agencies is being updated right now, and deals with more of the details of how to respond, how to identify hazards that are relevant, how to mitigate risks related to those hazards, and then how to recover following a disaster or event of some sort. And the general plan should incorporate by reference the local hazard mitigation plan. Existing safety policies on the books for fire, having to do with enforcing building codes that are designed to reduce risk related to urban fires, maintaining street widths, turning radius so that fire response and evacuation is possible, making sure that there's water pressure related available for fighting fires. Another policy having to do with projects that come in that are near oak woodlands in areas prone to fire, a requirement for wildfire protection plans showing how vegetation clearance will be maintained around planned structures while also preserving oak trees. So a couple questions here. It's fine to have policies that reference existing law or codes, but there is also the option of changing those cross-references to just be statements of policy. The town will ensure that new development is done in such a way that reduces fire risk, something like that, and then let the codes themselves do the implementation work. There's also the question of whether there are different wildfire risk areas within the town's planning area. Perhaps the policies could be adjusted to be more specific to different locations of their fire hazard risk, and perhaps recommending defensible space requirements for areas that are relatively higher wildfire risk. There are also policies on the books related to emergency response and evacuation, as shown on this slide, complying with Placer County's emergency response plan and the town's emergency plan to address town-specific issues, and then a street address ordinance to assist emergency response. So gaps, questions, revisions here might include adding policy to establish the town's intent to coordinate with the county on emergency response. Perhaps a new implementation program or implementation measure to keep the town's emergency plan updated as time goes along, as the climate changes, as different specific response protocols are required. Perhaps thinking about connectivity. Emergency access is important for emergency response, but also evacuation. It's important to have multiple points of both entry and evacuation, especially in areas that are prone to wildfire and flooding. So perhaps the town could consider policies that require that connectivity, multiple points of access, not long dead ends serving multiple homes, multiple areas, multiple ways to get at homes and developments in case of an emergency. And then finally, this has been brought up as well in comments in this committee meeting and through the email inbox, thinking about whether policies and implementation should be established to that consider the constraints that the railroad places. If there happens to be a train, the railroad splits the town, that creates barriers to access, both for getting emergency personnel to an area as well as evacuation. There are also policies dealing with flooding, focusing in on floodplain areas as established by FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, having to do with new development near existing stream channels, and that development designed to avoid creating downstream flooding effects, having to do with channelization, banking of creeks and streams, and then having to do with site-specific recommendations for new development that are consistent with the town's drainage master plan that are applied to individual development projects as they are proposed. So here, again, just some potential thoughts in terms of revisions. Perhaps instead of policy 4, which is very detailed and is more implementation oriented, perhaps that statement could be implementation and there could be a brief statement of policy instead about structures relative to flood risk. We also might want to consider special policies that are related to the siting of new critical facilities, essential facilities, so that they are out of areas that would be prone to flood risk or fire risk or other hazards. And then, like I said earlier, maybe some implementation that would update the town's guidance as the climate changes, consistent with state law on climate adaptation resiliency. There are also existing safety policies related to seismic risk, requiring analysis for new projects, geotechnical analysis, so that projects are designed to be resilient to seismic risk as relevant. Coordination with other agencies to ensure loss due to seismic activity is minimized, and then to encourage compliance with state requirements for unreinforced masonry buildings and seismic safety. Again, here are some questions that might be relevant for this committee for your input, thinking about whether policies on seismic risk should apply to major remodels, to additions, as well as new development. Potentially thinking about whether grading ought to be limited during the rainy season, or whether there should be special requirements for grading that occurs during the rainy season. And there is guidance in the existing general plan related to development in areas of greater slopes, should that be an area for revision looking forward. This extremely wordy slide presents the existing policies related to hazardous materials, which are basically related to compliance with what is already on the books for state regulations. So there are many policy areas in a general plan that are up to the local discretion, that relate to aesthetics, that relate to oftentimes air quality or greenhouse gas emissions, transportation policy, other areas. And then there's hazardous materials. This is an area that is very much the purview of federal and state law. Heavily regulated hazardous materials requirements for new developments for existing businesses that use hazardous materials. So this is not really so much of an area for local preference, except to the extent to which perhaps the town might consider policies that would restrict new development along the railroad line where there's a transportation of existing hazardous materials. Which I have essentially said on this slide. Okay, so are there other gaps, revisions? So I've rolled through the existing public health and safety element, not the noise part yet, and identified some questions this committee might consider in terms of providing input for this general plan update. But what else? As I mentioned, climate adaptation resiliency is not currently addressed, but needs to be pursuant to state law, identifying the assets and resources and populations that are sensitive to climate change, evaluating the ability of the town to deal with the impacts of climate change, historic data on hazards that are vulnerable in a changed climate, such as wildfire and flooding, and then policies to deal with existing and planned development in areas that are at risk to a changed climate. So that's one obvious gap for this general plan to make up. But also related to that, climate change adaptation is a huge issue affecting is not sensitive to political boundaries. Climate change affects Placer County in the same way it does Loomis, in the same way it does Rockland and surrounding areas. And these are big ticket items, better pursued in collaboration with other regional partners. And then, as I mentioned, the Placer County Local Hazard Mitigation Plan deals with these topics in more detail and should be incorporated by reference into the updated safety element. We have Luke Saxelby on the line, I believe. Mary Beth, you said that his little box is populated. Excellent. So he's the expert, but I will just present a few slides that hopefully wet your collective whistles on thinking about what changes ought to be made in this element related to noise. The general plan requirements, the state law requirements for a noise element require cities and counties in California to identify and appraise noise problems from your major noise sources, whatever they are. In Loomis, it's primarily transportation related noise. To develop noise contours, which is just a mapping of noise exposure out from those noise sources, and then to identify solutions for both existing and future noise problems. The existing noise goals are presented on this slide. They talk about protecting the local population to reduce the effects of noise from transportation sources without the construction of sound walls, to maintain the quiet rural ambience of the town, and to minimize the noise effect of railroad operations on residential uses and other sensitive land uses. What we don't have in the goals right now is any goal related to temporary construction related or other temporary sources of noise. That might be a gap that this committee could consider additions in terms of goal content. The existing noise policies are presented in tabular form and text in the existing element. This slide shows maximum allowable noise exposure for transportation noise sources for different types of land uses that have different noise sensitivities, residential having high noise sensitivity, offices and playgrounds, parks, other uses that are relatively less sensitive to noise exposure. So one question before this committee could be, are these and this is a very technical area, and Luke will weigh in on, is 65 the right number? What other options are there? What does it mean? But one question before this committee would be, are these the right numbers? Should we be more sensitive to noise exposure for rural parts of the planning area compared to developments around the downtown area that might be relatively less sensitive to noise exposure? Those kinds of questions would be germane for this committee. We also have existing policies for non-transportation noise sources, such as mechanical equipment, parking lot, sweeping, landscape maintenance, these other non-transportation noise sources. This particular table is very complex for future projects in terms of compliance, especially where there are multiple non-transportation noise sources going on. So this table shows standards of noise exposure by time. So loud things that only last less than a minute, the standards are relaxed. Loud things happening that last 30 to 60 minutes, there's a very, very quiet noise standard presented in the existing general plan for that type of noise source. So what gaps or revisions might we have? And we have Paul Ballard on the line too, who's a noise expert. And there may be other noise experts out there, and there may be many other gaps and potential revisions we might want to consider here, but some of them would be, should we consider criteria for acceptable noise increases for CEQA projects compared to the general plan? That might be two different questions. The general plan might have aspirational goals for a noise environment, and we might have also separately noise standards that are enforced through the California Environmental Quality Act environmental review for proposed projects. Should we consider also vibration? The railroad produces vibration, heavy trucks produce vibration. That's also very annoying to sensitive uses. Should the general plan have guidance on vibration? And then, as I mentioned earlier, should we have relaxed standards that relate to the downtown area? So the next steps are to continue your review of the existing settings, the existing element, to make your little crib notes on what changes we ought to make to the settings sections, what changes we should make to goals, policies, and implementation measures in the general plan itself, to submit those comments to the email address that you see on your screen here, and then to attend our next Public Health, Safety, and Noise Committee meeting May 19th, where we will discuss more specifically proposed revisions to this element. Finally, we are at the discussion portion of this meeting tonight, and I pass it back to the chair to entertain questions that the group may have. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Matt. And I'd like to make available time for Luke if he wanted to make an addition to Matt's presentation. If not, that's fine.
I'm sorry, you cut out for a second. Was that question to me? I apologize.
It wasn't a question, it was an opportunity. I just wanted to extend an opportunity for you to add to, if you felt the need, to what Matt was saying. But if not, no big deal, we'll continue on.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I think Matt did a great job. I think from my perspective, a couple of big questions are really, I think the town has pretty good policies in place. It's a question of whether we still feel those policies are appropriate. And we've already seen the comments specific to, why is the town standard 65 dB when the state recommends 60? So, I don't know the history there. If maybe there was a discussion in the past about, allowing development maybe to be not as constrained around the freeway or railroads, but it's a really great question. I figured it would probably come up. And then also with the town's non-transportation standards, they are a little bit complex, and moving to an hourly average or LEQ standard is probably not a bad idea. A lot of jurisdictions have done that. It's a lot easier to measure and enforce and deal with. So that is where I would like to focus my revisions to the general plan policies in those areas. I'm really interested to hear what the committee has to say. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Luke. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
At this point, I'd like to open it up to the committee to ask questions of staff. And if I may take the opportunity, I'll be the first to go. And I was speaking with a resident today who lives by the railroad tracks, and his attitude is a good one. He understands that the railroad came first, the building of his house came second. So when he bought his house, he understood the environment, that he was moving next to a railroad track. So he's not complaining about Union Pacific, but his specific question to me was this. He understood, and he might be mistaken on this, but he understood that other neighboring communities, and what he means specifically is Rockland and Roseville, have somehow arranged with Union Pacific to lower the decibel level of the warning that the engine sounds as it approaches crosswalks. And apparently there's a federal law that says they have to give a warning, and it makes sense because it could be a dangerous situation if they are not announced on their approach. However, his point was that his understanding was that Roseville and Rockland have negotiated some deal with Union Pacific or made some sort of arrangements where they're less loud as far as the horn. And he wondered, what could Loomis do to have that same arrangement?
I think this question came up briefly last time a little bit also, and it's called establishing a quiet zone, I believe. It requires a federal action, and there's certain requirements that have to be implemented near grade crossings. There's options like physical barriers to prevent cars from crossing. There's wayside horns, which is like a speaker that replicates the sound of the warning horn. These elements, I don't know the exact process, and I apologize for that. I don't know the exact process for obtaining that quiet zone, but there is a process where jurisdictions have done that. I believe the city of Elk Grove may have also done that. But there's certain requirements that have to be met. And then that allows, when those requirements are met and that is recorded at the federal level, it allows the train conductors to optionally decide not to sound their horns. They may still sound their horns if they see an imminent danger. So they're not required to not sound their horns, but it gives them the option, if they don't feel it's necessary, to not sound the horn. So, there's some benefit to it for sure as far as reducing horn noise. That's all it's going to do. If the horns are sounded, obviously they're going to be as loud as they always are. But I think what the goal is less frequent sounding of the horns.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Again, anyone open to the committee to ask questions of staff?
Committee members, raise your hand. Oh, go ahead, Eva. You can unmute. Okay. Eva, hang on a second. Your voice sounds like Minnie Mouse, and we can't understand you. I don't know how to fix that. Minnie Mouse on helium. Anybody have suggestions?
If she could put it in the chat.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Can you type your question into the chat and I'll read it on this end? Okay. Well, while Eva's typing, we'll go forward with Paul.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
I don't sound like Minnie Mouse? Okay. So first of all, thank you for letting me be here and be part of the committee, and I apologize for missing the last meeting. I have a few thoughts, and first of all, Luke is spot on regarding the quiet zone, and I think that's something that Loomis should pursue, determine what those requirements are, because it does allow the railroad operator to not sound his horns, particularly at night. We did some work with the city of Rockland on quiet zones, and it's very doable. I don't know what the process is, but that information is out there. So that's number one. I don't know if this is the right time to bring up just brief comments about other noise related issues, but if it is, I've just got a couple of thoughts. I share Luke's concern that the existing noise standards that are applicable to non-transportation type noise sources are extremely onerous. And Luke and I are probably among a handful of people in Northern California that understand those. So to the extent that those can be simplified to an average and a maximum noise level standard, I highly encourage that. So Luke, I was grateful to hear that you're already thinking about going in that direction. With respect to sound walls, I would say that I'm not a fan of sound walls, and I really don't know anybody who is a fan of sound walls. And so I'm a big proponent of setting the noise standards to be applicable where the sensitivity exists, and recognizing there are different types of noise sources. So for example, a hospital, the exterior spaces of hospitals are typically noisy. And I know we don't have a hospital locally, but just to use this as an example, the exterior spaces might be a parking lot. And it says where the current standard says where the location of the outdoor activity area is unknown, you apply the standard at the property line. Well, the property line might be a parking lot, which is completely insensitive. And we don't want to see sound walls be required, for example, to shield a parking lot or some other insensitive area. So I'm going to encourage the language to be applicable, the standards to be applicable at locations where noise sensitivity actually exists and can be demonstrated, because that's where impacts would occur, and that's where mitigation efforts should be focused. So I have that thought. I would love to see some thresholds, and it sounds like Luke's heading in that direction already with some recommendations for compliance with CEQA requirements, because most general plan noise elements do not have thresholds for what we consider a significant increase in noise levels due to a project. So it's really left to the noise consultant to make a case for what is a reasonable increase in noise environments to determine whether or not mitigation is required. And to the extent that that can be codified, I think that would do a great service to the city and to people that work within the city to all be playing from the same deck. So you don't have somebody come in and says, no, we're going to use this standard, or I recommend this standard or that. So with respect to the noise standards, it's with a higher standard of 65, I'm not opposed to that. It's a little bit, buyer beware. If you're going to buy near the freeway, then there's an expectation that it's going to be a higher noise environment there. And I don't think we should wall in our communities in Loomis or elsewhere to try to achieve a lower level. I think if you want a lower level, then you need to do some research and determine where it is that you want to live. But set a reasonable standard. But I don't think 65 is unreasonable, particularly near the railroad tracks and near the highway. In the more rural parts of Loomis, it's really not an issue because the background levels are just never going to approach those kinds of levels, even along your busier streets, I think. So I don't think that there's a reason. I've reviewed the existing general plan policies. No reason to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I do think there are some areas that can be more easily understood by the public. It can be more rational in terms of where the standards are applied and so forth. So those are my 2 cents. I'd be happy to, provide more input when it's appropriate.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Paul. I received Eva's chat, so if I could share that with everybody. What she said was railroad stopping in town for emergency access. Is there any way to ensure this doesn't happen again? And also, why is the LDN over 24 hours when business have limited hours of operation?
I can take those shot at those. As far as the railroad stopping in town, I don't know what the issue was there. If there's more background, and I don't know if your concern is more safety or noise. If it's safety, I'll defer to Matthew. Generally, I'll say it, my knowledge of the railroad is they pretty much do what they want to do. So I don't think the town would have any jurisdiction on where the railroad decides to stop. As far as the LDN standard really applies to transportation noise. So I believe the comment regarding businesses, the non-transportation noise standards apply to businesses in the town. And there's a daytime standard and a nighttime standard for those types of uses. So the LDN standard, it's pretty typical standard for transportation. That is not what we would be looking at if we're looking at a development proposal for a commercial use. We're going to be looking at the non-transportation noise standards. And like I said, there's currently a different set of standard between the day and the night. It's also in the town's noise ordinance. So the LDN 24-hour standard would not be the appropriate standard for that kind of use.
Eva, did that sufficiently answer your question?
Maybe it did, except for the question about how to make sure the railroad doesn't stop within the town in a situation where there needs to be emergency access and evacuation happening. And I don't also know the specific background on that topic, but let me just this is something that I brought up in the presentation. Should we be thinking about emergency response in evacuation, in consideration that we have this major barrier to access and evacuation in the form of the railroad? And if there's something blocking along the railroad or something like that in an emergency event, that could create issues. And I was suggesting that perhaps we do have some kind of policy treatment. Railroads are unusual. Like Luke said, the town's jurisdiction is limited. The Public Utilities Commission has a lot more to do with regulation of railroads, and the federal agencies do more so than individual towns. However, I do think that maybe I'll just say, let's put this in the parking lot for as a topic that we should be thinking about and treating. I don't want to say that I have the answers on that topic tonight, but understand that is that okay, Eva? Let's mark it as a topic that's important for the safety element update.
Eva also said that there was a strike where the train blocked 3 intersections. So that would be a total concern there.
So I can also add a little bit about the train crossing issue. Generally, trains are regulated at the federal level. There's some state regulation of trains. So for instance, the blocking of intersections, I think, is regulated by the California Public Utilities Commission. And they've set some number of minutes that streets are allowed to be blocked unless there's some sort of emergency that prevents the train from being moved or other circumstance. But generally speaking, here at the local level, we're prevented from coming up with any kind of regulation of what the trains may or may not do.
There was also a comment in the chat from Georgia. Georgia Ann Kern. She says she will check with her Amtrak and Southern Pacific buddies for further information. So we may get some information coming that way. Jan, you may proceed.
Yeah, it's, being almost a lifelong resident here in Loomis, the train has always been, a huge part of our lives. And it's obvious that it's a horrible problem if that train gets stuck and we have a fire or whatever it is. But it seems to me like can't we add some sort of policy to establish a means of communication with Union Pacific and have some sort of point of contact for emergency situations, and make sure that that communication point of contact is something that we, do yearly, or, just make sure that because, as things develop too down Sierra College Boulevard, there's going to be a lot of issues down there too. So, and I know I've heard this over time, they can do whatever they want. Well, I would really like to see us have some sort of a means of communication with Union Pacific.
Melissa, you may unmute. Press your space bar. Uh-oh. Excuse me one moment.
Yeah, I got it. Okay.
Oh.
Yeah. I was thinking, you're talking about sound walls. Plants and trees actually absorb sound. So couldn't we plant more plants and trees along the ways where they're more noisy? And wouldn't that help with the sound? What do you think?
Unfortunately, trees do not do a lot to block sound. And you would need about 100 feet of dense vegetation to really get a noticeable difference. So, a row of trees, unfortunately, there might be some out of sight, out of mind benefit, but it's not going to actually provide much relief. So your best bet, if you're trying to avoid sound walls, is distance and perhaps landscaped berms, which accomplish more or less the same thing as a sound wall. They take up a lot more space, but they look a lot better. Those are really your two options for mitigating outdoor noise or as Mr. Ballard suggested, really looking at where the standards apply and making sure that we're applying the outdoor standard in an area that's actually noise sensitive. And I think a good example is a multifamily project where you have, say, an apartment complex next to a busy road, and maybe there's no outdoor space. Are you going to put a sound wall up to reduce the noise at the first floor level of an apartment complex where maybe people are just walking to or from their unit? How about looking at where people actually spend time outside? And usually with like an apartment complex, that might be a pool area or a play area or something like that. So making sense that if you are doing some kind of mitigation for noise, that it really makes sense. So thank you for the question.
I'd like to also point everybody to the chat. Our town deputy attorney, Andreas Boer, posted a link to the California Public Utilities Commission's rules and regulations regarding train activity at crossings within California. So if you're able to go there, pick up that link and save it aside for later, that would be some good information for your review. Russ Kelly, you are next. You may unmute.
Okay. I'd like to see if there's some kind of a table we could develop to identify whether it's state or federal or whoever's rules we're applying to some of these things. And I'm not sure quite how to do that, but it'd be nice to be able to, if you're looking at some of these things, to actually know where to go to find out further information. The fire department has been dealing with the railroad for quite some time, and I like Jan's idea of having some emergency contact access, so that the railroad, they run 24 hours a day. They have access to every train and all the information. And if they could be on board with us contacting them in event of emergency, and I'm sure there'd be some guidelines for that, but I think that's a great idea. The fire department has been dealing with the railroad issue for some time. And one of the things the fire department has done is they have a mutual aid agreement with the surrounding agencies, so that if for some reason they can't get across the tracks, other folks will. And they can do it very quickly. Sometimes it takes us a little longer to get there, but other agencies can get there. And that's in place. That's a mutual aid agreement the fire department has, and it's been that way for some time. One of the things that was said was the fire department in relation to the water. The fire department has no relation to the water except the fact that they go out and test the system on a regular basis. They don't provide the water, the water agency provides it. And this is another case where you really need to know how the whole process works in order to be able to know, what agency you're dealing with or that sort of thing. I think that's about it.
Thank you, Russ.
Mary Beth, do we have any more comment from committee members for staff?
Yes, we still have Jan. Go ahead.
So my question is about the Loomis's emergency plan. And I know the general plan, our old one, talks specifically about Loomis having its own and having it be looked over every 2 years or every 5 years. And I know that I've talked to Sean about it, and basically from what I understand is we wait for the Placer County's plan, and then that is our plan. And I just wondered, is that what you know? And the fact is that Loomis really doesn't have its own. And it seems to me we should. So I would just like to hear what other committee members feel about that. Or maybe one of you guys can explain, is that true? It's true, isn't it? That we're just basically mirroring the Placer County plan.
I believe that is true. And that is typical in a lot of areas where there is a more regional approach to local hazard mitigation. And where, earlier I was referencing the idea that this general plan would incorporate by reference the updated Placer County Local Hazard Mitigation Plan, where Loomis is a participating agency among other agencies in that regional effort. And so I don't know when the last town emergency plan was adopted or updated, but I do believe what you're saying is factually true, that that regional plan at the county scale deals with hazards that affect all the different agencies, deals with response, and the roles of different agencies, including Loomis, including fire, all the different agencies. And I believe that that is true, that there would be there is a Loomis section to that plan. The local hazard mitigation plan is being updated starting this year. It will have updated information related to climate change effects and other roles for the town looking forward, and that it would be the town's emergency response plan as well.
And if I could just jump in, there are some state laws about that. So the AB 2140 is requiring that the counties develop the local hazard mitigation plan, and that the local cities and towns then adopt that plan. And it further relates to the California Office of Emergency Services and FEMA requiring a plan to be updated by the county and also adopted by every city and town in the county in order to receive federal emergency funding. So it's something that you definitely want to have included and referenced in your safety element.
Yeah. Okay. So obviously we need to do some work in that area, but because the train goes right through the middle of our town, I really feel like it has happened before with that train, and if something were to happen, and I would really like to see how our citizens be, have a formal plan of what to do in that type of situation. And I think that's just something very unique to our town and all other towns that are carved through the middle by a train. So thank you.
And if I could add, the county has just circulated the update to their local hazard mitigation plan and staff review. It goes from department to department. We all comment in, and all those comments go back to the county. So I spent some time last week reviewing that. It's in Sean's hands to get engineering, building, all of the other departments involved to respond to update that plan. A lot of the information I provided was more related to out of the housing element, populations and things like that, to increase those numbers on that side, and some general comments in between. But they are working on updating that. Also, Eva asked if I could post a link to the current local hazard mitigation plan, and I'm just going to put that in the chat now so you can find that link there. Carolyn, you may proceed.
I was just going to add to about the local hazard mitigation plan. I sat on the one for 2016 for the county, and everyone is allowed to participate. So if you want to sit in on this one that's being reviewed right now, it started back in November for the county. It's, as Christy stated, it's supposed to be reviewed every 5 years for federal funding. And if it's not approved by the county, if there's any type of declaration that we're seeking money for, the county will not get it. And they do address quite a bit the railroad tracks. It's it's a known issue within Placer County for the access issues. But once again, just go to Placer County Emergency Services if you're interested in participating in that local hazard mitigation plan. And if you want something put in there for Luna specifically, I saw, and one of the screenshots at the beginning of this committee meeting, that was the town of Loomis. They're looking for input. They always were, at least in 2016, for all the towns and cities to participate and put into that. So it's identified in case something does happen and we do have either a natural or man-made disaster in the county, we can go ahead and request funds to repair and fix what's important to the various cities and towns within the county. So kind of just reiterated what most of you've already said. Thank you.
Good job. Georgia, would you like to speak? You can just unmute. I see you on a phone, so you would press *9 to unmute if you would have any comments at this point. Okay, no. Thank you.
Mary Beth, is that it for committee members?
That is it for our committee members, and we have a public member, Gene Wilson.
Let's open it up.
Okay. One question goes way back in the presentation. You had a very long paragraph that you said you could condense way down and simplify it. And I think it had a lot of agencies listed in it. And what I wondered is, if you take out all those agencies, would anybody that needs to know that know what all agencies they do? Where else would they know that information that they need to think about all those different agencies? If you take it out, where would they know that from someplace else?
Let me, through the chair, respond. I think the paragraph might have been related to flooding policy, and I might have said this could be condensed to be a concise statement of policy, and the details could be instead moved to an implementation measure. And let me just, Gene, if it's okay, I'll broaden your comment to give us, to say, we don't want to lose information as we are updating this general plan update. I think that's right on the money. I think to the extent that we are making more concise statements of policy so that future projects can be more easily evaluated against that policy, we don't want to lose that information. So it would go into implementation, for example, instead. I think what we're talking about might be semantics and organization, more so than substantive. So I'll take this note to mean if we do condense policies, we don't want to lose important information. And I think that's an excellent comment.
That makes sense. So that was my concern. And the other point had to do with noise, and this was just from a planning commission concern of what has actually come to us as complaints over the time that I was on the planning commission. Two of them had to do with kennels from time to time, and things did get solved, but there were some problems. And the other has to do with periodically we have complaints about the residential area that backs up to the light industrial. And so that has been a sore spot from time to time, and we try to enforce our permits so that we don't end up with those problems. But we did end up with one a couple of years ago, and we'll see what happens when things are not shut down with COVID, whether that recurs and how bad it is for the neighbors. But just to let you know, that has been, it's one of those edges thing, where you have one kind of, and the Loomis did not cause this was the county put that subdivision in next to, and the light industrial next to it at the same, they did that. And so Loomis has to deal with it, which we have tried to do with making the regulations for the light industrial. They're different from the rest of our little industrial parts with stricter noise restrictions. And that's something that I think we would not probably want to make things less stringent right there where we know it's already a problem area.
Thank you, Jean. Lorraine, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mary Beth. I had 2 or 3 comments or questions that I would like to raise. One, I'm concerned also about safety and the railroad tracks. As the economy heats up and things change over the next 5-10 years, I'm concerned that the number of large trains running, it won't be merely a matter of noise, but it'll be frequency of blocking movement from one side of the city to the other as increasing trains come through. I know depending on time of year, sometimes frequency is greater or lesser. I'm wondering if it shouldn't be raised with the circulation committee that there needs to be at least one overpass or underpass over the railroad tracks so that emergency vehicles have a easy route to, so that the city is not divided. So one area is more hazardous than the other because the emergency vehicles can't get to people as quickly, whether it's a heart attack or a fire or any of those things. I think it's going to take more than just calling up the train. I think there needs to be a more serious plan. So that's one. And I don't know if it's a possibility as monies become available, especially around transit, to seek some type of overpass or underpass for the city of Loomis, or some kinds of monies. The other one I had a question of is, I know that there's short-term noise and long-term noise. When it's an industrial noise, you might be able to go in and look at permits, but when it's short-term noise, are there enforcement mechanisms that the city is responsible for? I didn't see those. I don't know what happens on those. And my third question is a little bit, the person before me raised it, but there are some regulations, they're very minimal in terms of natural sounds. I know that roosters are prohibited from, and I'm assuming that's because of noise, because chickens are allowed. I don't really understand the role of the city at this point in time regulating those kinds of noises. I don't think it's appropriate for, town people to be using their valuable time to be looking at those things. So those are my 3 issues. And thank you for paying attention and allowing me time to speak. Thanks. A very good meeting.
Thank you, Lorraine. Okay, any other public members wishing to speak? Raise your hand or just unmute. Seeing none, Chairman.
Mary Beth, I see on the agenda we have some time allotted for committee deliberation and direction and also recommendation. Did you have something for that, or are we just going to leave it close?
I think that kind of is what comes out of the discussion we just had.
So
I would
not necessarily delineated, it's just run together.
Yeah, I think, we get all the comments, and in between that provides that deliberation between public, committee, and staff. If there's anything further that anybody would like to pursue, now is the opportunity. Or provide direction. I think you provided really good direction tonight, and all your comments have been very well received.
Well,
Martha, you may go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to add, I came from Davis, and it's the exact situation they had there with the train going right through the middle of town. And they did build an overpass, and I don't know how they paid for it, but it was a really big deal. It was really important to do. they didn't like to have their town blocked. Anyway, that's just what I wanted to share.
Thank you.
Well, with that, I agree. That was a good meeting. And I would like to thank Paul and Andreas and Christy for their timely comments. And I'd also like to thank Matthew and Luke for their presentation. And with that, our next meeting is scheduled for May 19th at 6 p.m. And Mary Beth will publish the Zoom link meeting on the agenda prior to. And at this point, let's see, the time now is 7:20 p.m. by my clock, and I call this meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you all.